discipline or disciplining your children, we do obviously have information given to us. One of the things that we see is that Proverbs is full of the admonition to actually apply the rod. We need to, sometimes we think of it this way. Today we are permissive parents, and in the past they were not permissive parents. In the past they were heavy disciplinarians. Now, is it necessarily the case that in the past they were heavy disciplinarians? No, it's not. Do we see examples of overly permissive parents within the Old Testament as well?
Yes.
Give me some examples.
David.
Eli. David. Who else? You said you had one, Derek.
I said Eli.
Okay, Eli and David. David literally lets his sons get away with murder. I mean, in his case, it's not an exaggeration. So we do see that occasionally there were parents who did not apply an adequate level of discipline to their children. Proverbs warns that this will not go well when it happens. Proverbs 29:15 says, "The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother." If we do not apply discipline, that child will be the shame of his parents. Or, "He who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly." So we see there this admonition that to actually love your son, or to show love to your child, will involve discipline. It will involve corporal punishment. Now, why has spanking become a taboo in our society? That would be my first question. Why is it a taboo subject? Why is it something we're not supposed to do? I mentioned spanking on Facebook, and I immediately get all of these negative responses. Not just from non-Christians, mind you. I get them also from Christians. Yes, Kevin?
Likened to child abuse at times?
It's likened to child abuse. Okay, any corporal punishment is immediately equated with child abuse. Now, is it possible to abuse your children? Yes, it is. Is spanking necessarily child abuse? No, it is not. When do you think it's good to spank a child? Give me just your particular estimate on it. Hopefully it's biblical, but when? Any? Yes?
When the
Nick?
child has sinned and the parent is under control or calm.
When the parent is...
When the child has sinned.
When the child has sinned.
That's the first qualification. The second one is the parent is in a
Calm
and sober mind.
not screamingly angry, wanting to take the child apart and put them away. Okay, that's a good. But just any sin? Should spanking be the first thing we immediately go to every single time? Okay, Derek says no. What do you think?
It's got to be the defiance that he was talking about in the earlier.
Right. There needs to be, I believe there needs to be a decision made. Was this childish irresponsibility or was it willful defiance? Willful defiance would be something that we should be spanking for, absolutely. When do you think it is bad to spank a child? Listen. Yes?
Almost make mistakes that they made or things that they do not hope.
Exactly. That's a very good caveat there. If your child did not know that what they had done was against the household law, against the Ten Commandments, for instance, then them doing it is spanking them for it is not a good response. Okay, you caught them up in something that was wrong, but that they did not know it was wrong. So therefore, it was not an act of willful defiance on their part. So that would be a good caveat. The opposite of what Nick said, also, if you are in a fury and you are likely to be out of control, you should not be spanking a child. And there should always be parameters. Justice within any good legal system has limits, and we should always have limits when we're spanking. For instance, our kids know, because we have a list of offenses and punishments associated with them, our children know what level of...
A vast virus database has been updated.
Isn't that wonderful? The virus database has been updated. Our children know that there are certain things that they will be spanked for, and what number of spankings they can expect. Now, the highest number of spankings, for instance, we award for lying, a particular act of defiance that we consider the worst of all. Now, how would you react to the following? Your 2-year-old keeps running into the street. Excuse me? Spank him. Okay. What are you trying to communicate to your 2-year-old by spanking him in that particular occasion?
Don't run into the street.
Don't run into the street. This is bad. Why is it so bad that your 2-year-old is running into the street? Because it goes against your commands? It's part of it. If they continue running into the street, what are they likely to do? Get hit by a car and die. Okay. Do we want our 2-year-olds to die? No. Therefore, discipline in that case is not only corrective, but necessary. How about you ask your 6-year-old to pick up her toys and she slams the door in your face? Open the door. Okay. Is that enough? Victor, do you have an answer? You spank her. Okay. Especially if it's a 6-year-old, because you definitely experienced willful defiance in that case. Your children, as we've seen, will test the boundaries and see if they can get away with that kind of thing. Disrespecting their parents openly is something that should not be allowed. How about your 8-year-old calls his sister a pig? You ask him to apologize, and he says, "I'm sorry, you're a pig." What do you think?
After you stop laughing, you should
Yeah, no, it's very important that when your child does something defiant but funny, do not laugh at your child's humor, okay? Because that's the response that they were trying to get in the first place. So you got to keep it under control. Laugh later with your wife when the door's closed. What do? And then you can post it as a really cute F-book status, so it'll be cool. Yes? Yes, Victor? No, actually, you wait until after he's spanked to get him to tell his sister he's sorry. He will be far more willing to do so afterwards. Trust me on that. So, okay, probably a spanking offense as well. Let's go on to the next one here. All right, some more insight into the issue of spanking. Do not withhold correction from the child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Now this one drives, in our current age, people up the wall. But there is some wisdom here. A lot of parents prefer to spank with their hand. They feel that it's better to do so. The actual experience is that it's not. When you spank with your hand, you are delivering force. You tend to move the child instead of creating something that simply causes pain, and you're more likely to leave bruises. Spanking with your hand is not preferable. Now, when it says spank with a rod, I don't mean go get the broom handle and so on, but a wooden spoon, something that causes a stinging sensation, is usually something preferable, or one of the spankers that are sold. Obviously, nothing that would cause permanent harm to your child that's not something that you would want to use. But you shall spank him. Correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will delight to your soul. Now, that is a promise there. If you apply biblical punishment, your child will be a delight to you, whereas it will be a big pain in the neck if you do not. This is also something that is often, whenever you're talking about physical punishment of your child, corporal punishment, a lot of people will say, well, that's an Old Testament idea. We're New Testament Christians. Now, aside from the problem of the artificial division of the Old and the New Testaments, dividing the Bible as though it was not one word of God, and the fact is Jesus calls all the word of God, the prophets and the law and the prophets, that which speaks of him, and the word of God entire. Apart from all of that, it also occurs within the New Testament. Hebrews, for instance, picks up on the theme of chastening, speaking of the chastening that Christians receive as a sign of the love of the Father. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterwards, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. It says, yes, of course, the process of being spanked never seems good at the time that it's happening. But afterwards, we talked about the effects of time related to discipline. Afterwards, in the fullness of time, the goodness of spanking is actually seen, and the good effects that it produces become evident. Now, do parents ever spank for reasons other than correction? What might those be? Sort of touched on this already. Hands? Anybody? Yes, Nick?
It's still a form of correction, but if it's teaching them that something is dangerous, like running out into the street, that's something that I'll spank the right way.
Okay.
Because that's dangerous, and that's something they need to learn that lesson right away.
So that there's something memorable that
Yes.
goes with it. Okay. See that? Any other thoughts? Yes?
Not spiritual spanking if the child has embarrassed their parent.
Oh, yes. You're taken away from the honor and dignity of your parent. All right. Other things? How about we're just furious, or we're transferring our own frustrations to our child? Often what will happen is there will be an act of childish irresponsibility, and it just comes at exactly the worst time. Okay? We are at a low ebb. We are hormonal. We had a bad day at work, and we just blow up. And our child receives a spanking that's probably not merited. Is that good? No. And this goes back to the original caveat, don't spank in anger. Now, in a household, one parent will probably end up doing more spanking than the other. But if you are really furious at your child, and some corporal punishment is merited, what should you do if your spouse is in the home? Hand the child over to them for punishment. Explain the circumstances, what you believe is appropriate, and then have them spank the child rather than yourself. Do not spank so that they'll win, and do not over spank, obviously. According to these verses, there's a connection between spanking and salvation and sanctification. What is it? What do you think?
Jesus Christ said, "You'll be persecuted tribulation, pain, suffering, chastisement, all these things." So it's kind of like related to kind of giving an idea of
But there he was kind of speaking of the persecution of the world, the flesh, and the devil directed towards his bride, the church. I don't think he when he's talking about in this world you will suffer tribulation, he's saying you're going to get spanked by the Father specifically. It's not speaking of chastening. Although it is a fact that tribulation is something that the Christian can expect in this life. What do we think?
It does say repeatedly that God chastens those that he loves. And
Yes.
so when we chasten and we do it in love, the way that we're supposed to with our own children, it shows them that same relationship and hopefully corrects the deficiency.
Right. One of the things that we also notice is that generally speaking, those whom the Father intends to save, his children, will usually be brought to an end of themselves. We might say that they will be disciplined, chastened by the Father in this life. Many of the men that I know who have been saved, or I know several men who have been saved as a direct result of bad consequences of their actions. They went to prison, for instance. If they had continued on in the way that they were going and not received correction, they would not have turned from the lifestyle that they were in. But suddenly being brought to rock bottom caused them to look up to God. As Thomas Watson said, when God lays men on their backs, often they look up to God. And it is usually the case that a child who has not received any sort of punishment that has been spoiled will not be a likely candidate for salvation. One of the reasons for that is because they have not experienced law, and they do not acknowledge that what they are doing is evil. They have not been taught that. So there's no sin relationship, sin-salvation relationship. Also, we see the chastening of the Lord as usually a part of the sanctification process. As we are chastened, we grow in grace and in the knowledge of the Lord. We receive his admonition. So admonition and exhortation are supposed to be parts of the Christian life as well. We are supposed to be admonishing and exhorting one another when necessary. It's part of God's chastening process that builds us up in sanctification. So there is this dynamic that says that our children's salvation, and obviously it's not, you don't spank somebody into the kingdom. it doesn't work that way. But discipline properly applied will be something that will be used for good in the lives of our children, not just temporally in terms of their discipline and behavior, but also eternally. And this is something to keep in mind, that as we discipline our children, we are actually doing good to their souls, not merely to their bodies. All right? All right, well, anyway, let's maybe further things to say about that, but let's now go to the video. That's Spank or not Spank, number 5. See if I can cut the lights.
You know, I just love kids. I like how they think. I like how they behave most of the time. And it is a fun topic to be talking with you about. In the first video, we talked about some basic principles and guidelines to consider when disciplining your child. Then we discussed the importance of establishing clear-cut boundaries. And then we distinguished between childish irresponsibility and willful defiance. We've shown how ineffective it is to use anger to change behavior. And finally, we've tagged along with Goldilocks as she looked for the bear family that had just the right balance between being too strict and too permissive. Well, today we're going to talk about the controversial use of corporal punishment in training a child, or spanking, as it's known in some circles. Here's what some people have said to us about that practice.
I think if I get flipped out and I swat my kid, that teaches my kid that when you get flipped out, you swat somebody else. And I just don't think that's a good thing to do.
I don't think spanking is probably the best and most effective way. Sometimes it is.
Then why do you do it? I don't think my mom and dad should give me spanking because I don't like spanking.
I think that hitting encourages violence because hitting is violent, is a violent behavior.
Well, there's not much doubt about how those folks feel about corporal punishment. But you know, until about 30 years ago, those kind of negative comments would have been in a decided minority. In fact, I was a guest on Phil Donahue program in 1978, a long time ago, when this issue was being discussed. And before the show started, Phil asked the audience of about 150 women if they believed in spanking. And all but 2 said they did. They were back in the corner. And he started the program with those 2 ladies, making it appear that their position was the dominant one in the studio that day. And that was my first clue that I wasn't going to get a fair shake in the debate that followed. Now, I tell you that story because it illustrates what the media has done in the intervening years to change public opinion on this issue. If you only know what you've read in the popular press, you would think that spanking is invariably indicative of child abuse. The truth of the matter is that there has not been one scientific study, not one, that has documented any harm from corporal punishment. Now, certainly, there have been dozens of articles that have tried to make that case, but all of the studies that have been done have had a single flaw. The researchers fail to distinguish between harsh, oppressive child abusers on the one hand, as compared with the parents who use spanking in a loving and controlled manner. The first category did not rule out all of the angry mothers and dads who hated their kids, and they're out there, or the alcoholics, or the mentally unbalanced parents, or the adults who secretly enjoyed making children suffer, and so on. If you include all those people, of course the results showed corporal punishment was harmful under those circumstances. But when the researchers controlled for that bias, every study has revealed that there is no harm to the practice. For example, doctors at the University of Nebraska Medical Center reviewed 38 separate studies, 38 of them, and found that in children under the age of 7, non-abusive spanking produced no harmful effects, while at the same time it substantially reduced misbehavior. And that's a very important finding. I am absolutely convinced that child abuse is most likely to occur when the parents have no answer for rebellious, irritating behavior that's motivated by willful defiance. And as a result, all they can do is talk and warn and threaten and scream and blow up. By contrast, those who handle the misbehavior early, they know how to deal with it, avoid that volatile level where anything can happen. You see, child abuse is not usually premeditated. It's a result of out-of-control parents who become so angry that they want to hurt the child who's frustrating them out of their minds. Corporal punishment, when it's used rightly, therefore, actually reduces the incidence of harm to children.
It seems like every day when you get home from work, you're faced with something with the kids bickering and fighting. And, you just don't know what to do sometimes. Which one to spank? You don't know which one did what. It's just hard sometimes.
And sometimes I don't know whether it's a time to spank or not, whether I should just do a timeout or if I should just reprimand or if it's really a spanking time.
Now, let's make no mistake about it. If it's used in an abusive way, spanking can become an excuse to do great harm to children. And I certainly want to make that clear. So the issue here is not whether to spank or not to spank. It's with how it's handled by a parent or a guardian. You see, corporal punishment is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used rightly or wrongly. Let's look at some of the guidelines that will assure that if you do choose to use this approach, if that's in your repertoire of discipline, that you do it in a way that's actually beneficial for the child. First of all, why does corporal punishment work in the first place? Well, it's because it fits hand in glove with a child's nature. Let me give you an example. Suppose 2-year-old Robert is pulling on a tablecloth, and there's a vase of roses which sits on that tablecloth, and he pulls it in, it tips over the edge, and it cracks in between the eyes. From this pain, he learns that it's dangerous to pull on the tablecloth unless he knows what's sitting on it. When he touches a hot stove for the first time, he quickly learns that heat must be respected. And if he lives to be 100, he will never again reach out and touch the red-hot coils of a stove. So for 3 or 4 years, he accumulates bumps and bruises and scratches and burns, and each one teaches him something about life's boundaries. Now, do these experiences make him a violent person? No, that's what people say about spanking. It makes them violent. No, it doesn't make them violent, unless it is done abusively. The pain that's associated with these events, minor pain, not bruises, not burns, not all those things we were just talking about, but minor pain teaches a child to avoid making the same mistakes again. God created this mechanism as a valuable vehicle for instruction. Now, when a parent administers a reasonable spanking in response to willful defiance, a similar nonverbal message is being given to the child. He must understand that there are not only dangers in the physical world to be avoided, like we were talking about, he should also be wary of dangers in the social world, such as defiance and sassiness and selfishness and temper tantrums and behavior that puts his life in danger. The minor pain that's associated with this deliberate misbehavior, when it's willful, tends to inhibit it, just as the discomfort works to shape behavior in the physical world. No, neither conveys hatred, neither results in rejection, neither makes the child more violent. In fact, children who have experienced corporal punishment from loving parents do not have trouble understanding its meaning. And they get the picture even if some of their critics sometimes don't. All right, let's turn now to some of our parents who were helpful to us. And we asked them to pose some specific questions that deal with this issue of corporal punishment, and then I'll take a swing at the answers.
I have a daughter that's very good-natured. Don't have too many problems with her. I have a son that sometimes can be a little monster, and I'm wondering if I should treat him equally regarding spanking.
Well, the answer is an emphatic no. You know, some children are compliant and they're sensitive and they don't need very much discipline. I mean, a stern look is sometimes all that's necessary to keep them in line. Others seem to beg for correction. And when they push the limits like this, the parent really needs to respond. When that occurs, you know what to do now. And spanking is one of the approaches that you might take.
How early should we start spanking? 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 6 years?
Well, you certainly do not want to begin too early. You know, a child has to be able to understand what it is that you are insisting on, and then he has to be able to give it to you. And it is very harmful to a child to start this kind of punishment too early. I think it can begin with a mild slap on the hand when the child is about 18 months of age and he clearly knows what's expected, but he disobeys anyway, especially when he's reaching for a light plug or something that could harm him. From there, spanking is appropriate until about 7 or 8 years of age. This approach should not be necessary after 10, and for many children it's younger than that. Although children vary in the maturity and in their willfulness. I do not, and let me emphasize this, I do not recommend spanking teenagers. First of all, because it doesn't work. And second, because it's insulting to this teen who's trying hard to prove he's grown up. And finally, because the time for corporal punishment is past. There is a time for it, and then there's a time when you move on to other forms of discipline.
I'm confused. Where in the body should I spank my child if they really do need a spanking?
Well, the Lord has provided a very convenient place for corporal punishment. It's called the buttocks, where damage is not likely to occur. You know, kids should not be hit or shaken firmly, especially babies. Brain damage can occur when a baby is violently shaken. And one of the most common forms of child abuse occurs when a parent is angry and out of control and reach down and grab the child by the arm and jerk him up, and that can dislocate the shoulder or the elbow. You know, you just have to be careful, and the buttocks is the place of choice.
Is there anybody who should not be allowed to spank even though they believe in it?
Absolutely. Anyone who has a history of child abuse or someone who is not under control emotionally, this approach should not be used by anyone if they secretly enjoy punishing a child. And some people do. I don't understand that, but some people do. And grandparents should probably not spank a child unless the parents have given them the permission to do so.
Dr. Dodson, do you think that it's better for a parent to spank with an object or use their hand?
Well, that's a very good question, and there are some strong differences of opinion about it, even among those who approve of corporal punishment. I personally, and this is speaking for myself, I personally prefer that a neutral object be used, such as a switch or a small belt. You know, the hand is an object of love, and I really like to keep it that way. Also, if mom or dad don't have something in their hand, the child need not flinch when they make a sudden move. But if the parent feels uncomfortable using a neutral object, then do what feels right. This one can go either way. Okay, let me leave you with this story. I recall some very good friends, Art and Ginger Shingler, great friends of ours. who had 4 absolutely beautiful children whom I loved. And one of them got testy at one point, and he was just asking for it. And the conflict came to a head in a restaurant when the boy continued to do everything he could to be bratty. Finally, Art had had enough, and he took him out to the parking lot for an overdue spanking. Well, a woman passerby observed the event, and she just became irate. And she chided the father for abusing his son and said she intended to call the police. She was really kicking up a storm. And with that, the child who had been spanked stopped crying and said to his father, "What's wrong with that woman, Dad?" He understood the discipline even if his rescuer didn't. You know, a boy or girl who knows love abounds at home will not resent a well-deserved spanking, especially if you hold them close after the event has occurred. And one who is unloved or ignored will hate any form of discipline and will resent the parent for doing it. Well, that's the end of this program. Thanks for joining us today for Focus on the Family. I'm Dr. James Dobson.
Okay, one caveat, I've made it before, but I'll make it again. As you know, society is turning distinctly as a result of the efforts of people like Donahue that he pointed out. There's been a distinct progression now. So within, especially the non-Christian community, spanking is seen as abusive always. There's just, you're taught that in college, spanking is always abusive. So many states are passing laws. Child Protective Services is very on the ball when it comes to child abuse. Therefore, spanking in public can be a very dangerous thing and something that I would not recommend. I would recommend that you take your children home before you administer corporal punishment. However, here's the question. If your state, like Delaware, for instance, passes a law against spanking, does that mean you stop spanking? Why or why not?
No.
Okay, we don't stop spanking. Why?
The state doesn't have the right. They've overstepped their bounds.
They have overstepped their bounds.
They don't have the right to tell you how you are to raise your children.
And
we are commanded in Scripture to do this, and so you can't. God trumps the state.
At that point, the apostle's statement, we ought to obey God rather than man, comes into play. God has specifically commanded us to exercise corporal punishment when it comes to our children. So if the state tells us we can, that is the point at which we say to Caesar, we cannot obey what they're telling us to do. Any questions about today's segment? Victor? He's forgotten his question. Anybody have a question they haven't forgotten? All right, well, let's go ahead.